收到了，直接开始吧。各位来宾，大家好。今天的国际学者圆桌论坛正式开始。本场次的主题为全球在地化下的公共治理经验与视角，台湾的下一步。
Ladies and gentlemen, today's International Scholars Roundtable has officially begun. The theme of this roundtable is Public Governance in Glocalization, Experience and Lessons for Taiwan.
接下来，让我们欢迎本场次的主持人，台湾大学政治学系暨公共事务研究所苏彩足教授，为我们主持本场次的论坛。
Now, let us invite the moderator, Professor Tsai-Tsu Su from the Department of Political Science of National Taiwan University. Welcome, Professor Su.
欢迎苏教授。
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I will be the moderator for this session. As we know that the theme of this session is public governance in glocalization, experiences and lessons for Taiwan. It's no secret that the Taiwanese government is currently facing a wide range of public governance challenges, including the widening political polarization, declining birth rate, a weak economy, labor shortage, drug problems on campus, a weak cybersecurity issues, etc. Therefore, we would like to gather global experiences and from other nations and learn valuable lessons. That being said, we are very grateful to the Department of Public Administration at National Zhengzhi University for organizing this event with such dedication, putting a lot of efforts, inviting several world-renowned scholars to participate in this year's TASPAA annual conference. And some of the scholars are here today with us, ready to share their wisdom and insights. And so now, please allow me to briefly introduce the speakers to you. In the order of presentation, the first speaker is Professor Bennis So. Okay, yeah, okay, thank you. I'm sure many of you know Professor Bennis So. He's a well-known scholar at National Zhengzhi University. He will be the first to speak, focusing on the Taiwan's public governance challenges. The second speaker is Professor Geert Bouckaert. Professor, please. Thank you. Please be seated. Okay. Professor Bouckaert is a professor at the Public Governance Institute, KU Leuven, Belgium. His research interests include public management, policy design, and strategy. The third speaker is Professor Amy Franklin. Okay, thank you. Amy is from the Department of Political Science, University of Oklahoma. She has published numerous journal articles and books on public budgeting and finance, strategic planning, and performance measurement. The last speaker is Dr. Ramesh. Okay. Professor Ramesh teaches at the famous Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. He specializes in public policy and governance in Asia with a particular focus on social policy. He's also the president of the International Public Policy Association. With all these four outstanding scholars with us this afternoon, I'm sure we are going to have a very lively and exciting discussion. And I also want to explain to all the international scholars here that the audience today, apart from scholars and students, comprises a large percentage of government officials who are quite experienced in their field. So I think this will provide a good opportunity to integrate the theory and practice in public governance. Finally, I have some rules to ensure the session goes smoothly. First, the time for each panelist presentation is 12 minutes. 12 minutes only. Okay, a reminder will be given at the 10-minute mark. And then a reminder every minute after time is up. So as a public budgeting scholar, time is always the most scarce resource in the conference. And the allocation of scarce resources is never easy. And secondly, we will have a Slido Q&A session after all presentations are done. But you may start writing questions on Slido while this speech is going on. And we encourage the audience to raise questions in English, but do feel free to type your question in Chinese, because we have invited Professor Wang Huimin to assist with translation. Okay, now without further ado, it's time to invite our first speaker, Professor Bennis So. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Professor Bennis So with a big applause. Thank you.
老师，你要台阶吗？
不用。
麦克风开好，这是简报。
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, it's my honor to be here to have an opportunity to have a dialogue, international dialogue with our foreign guests today. And here, my role, why I'm the first presenter, because my role here is to try to frame the issue context and give my own diagnosis over the Taiwan's public governance problems. Maybe many of you know that I was not born in Taiwan. I've been here for more than 21 years working in Taiwan. So I somewhat stay in between insider and outsider. So I would like to give critical observations over the public governance problems in Taiwan. So the following I present may not be agree with all of you, but this is my own observations. Because major themes of this panel is talking about some challenge. Actually, it's not our own challenge, it's a global challenge. And especially there's some challenge we'll share with our neighboring countries in East Asia. First of all, the polarization, no, not here, sorry. The first one, as many other countries around the world, we will face the so-called political polarizations. But in Taiwan, the case is about the blue-green confrontations. So-called blue-green confrontation is not in terms of any left-right policy line. It's about the cross-right relationship, about the national identity, the problems. But this is for a long time after 1990s, for more than 30 years, these confrontations. Second, as other countries, we need to maintain the economic growth and enhance the global competitiveness. At the same time, we need to pursue a sustainable and environmental friendly development. Of course, this is not necessarily a zero-sum game. We can try to balance it. But what we are facing, an unfavorable condition here is the first one, energy supply crisis. Because our powerhouse, IT industry, especially semiconductor industry, this sector is a energy consuming sector. But we still debate whether we should have a nuclear power at this time. And other situation is about labor shortage. Besides the IT tenants, we also have, you will sense that, actually recently I sense that the labor shortage problem is very serious in Taiwan. Even in our daily life, we can sense that. I find there's some food short, They now just take away service, no in service. Why? Explicitly say, because we have labor shortage problem. Okay, so you can sense that it's very serious in Taiwan now. And then this problem, to a certain extent, is caused by the aging population problem, or exacerbated by the aging population problem. Now, in East Asia, Taiwan is not the lowest one, because lowest is South Korea. Last year, 0.78, the fertility rate. Taiwan now is 1.219, similar to Japan, it's 1.2. Okay, a little bit better than China. China is 1.09, okay? But still very low, okay, for Taiwan. So at the same time, we don't consider any, actually, immigration policy. I always say Taiwan should have immigration policies. But now, it's a common cause in East Asia. We don't have explicitly have immigration policies, okay? I think immigration policy can help diversify our population component. Okay, no matter what questions or what problem we are going to address, I think especially I want to transfer the experience from other countries. We need to, take the local context into consideration. Especially in Taiwan, we have some unique context. I identify 5 points, okay, to represent this unique context in terms of the public governance. The first point is the politics administration fusion. It's also common in East Asia. The second is peaceful democratic transition. The third one is the continental law system, but highly steered by the Anglophone public administration. The fourth one is deep-seated traditional Chinese administrative patterns and culture, and the last one is legacies of developmental state. Okay, the first one. This point actually is not overlooked by me. It's in Hong Kong. There's Anthony Cheung, Professor Anthony Cheung, is talking about politics administration relations in East Asia. He called this term politics administration fusion. What does it mean? It means that actually in Taiwan, the political responsibility, administrative responsibility is not clearly cut. Why? One of the reasons is, you will see the second point, is the absence of head of civil service in ministries and departments as a buffer between political officers and career officers. So you'll find that in Taiwan, the political appointees, they play the both roles, leaders and managers, the agents, managers. Okay, so you'll find that the result is the administration is highly politicized in Taiwan. I think many civil service here, you should sense that, sense this problem. The political appointee always intervenes in your daily working. Okay. Okay, for this point, I want to further see the problem of transformation of bureaucracies in Taiwan. I use, how come? Okay, some problem with, you should have a slide, okay, actually, it's somewhat different, okay. I shared the concept with Professor Bouckaert about the new rebellion bureaucracies. And in the modern state, okay, we, in Europe, developed rebellion bureaucracy, okay, and in the 1980s, it run into new public management, and then Bouckaert hypothesized that they should have developed a new rebellion bureaucracy. What does that mean? It means that combine the professional bureaucracy with citizen-friendly bureaucracy. That's the framework, okay, developed by Professor Bouckaert. In Taiwan, okay, because there's something brought, okay, actually, in Taiwan, originally it was a party-state bureaucracy before 1980s. But during the democratization, some intelligentsia in Taiwan, actually at that time, in 1980s and 1990s, they called for developed so-called professional bureaucracy, which should develop technocrats at that time. Okay, but it was not realized in 1990s. At this time, we also run into new public management. The result is, I will call it populist bureaucracy. What does it mean? There's three characters: suppressions of professionalism, high degree of political responsiveness, and high degree of public responsiveness. Frankly speaking, I think some foreign guests will sense that the civil surveys, the public sector surveys, the quality and the attitudes is very good. It's higher than many Western countries. But in fact, we will sense that, okay, it's somewhat at the expense of the professional standard and consideration. There's a polarization of the administration. Okay, second point, the consequence of peaceful democratic transition. Different from the former Soviet state in the Eastern Europe, we didn't experience overflow of political regimes. So our political institution or basic frameworks was kept intact. Even we have made some amendments for several times, a couple of times. So, okay, and we have separate the ruling parties from the government. So you will find that most of the so-called transition, okay, just say institutional layering rather than replacement. So we still have a five-power institution. So our public sector reform, for example, in the civil service reform, we win in the host of separate examination yuan. What's the consequence? For example, we want to develop a separate civil service system. But because this in the host of an examination yuan, we find it difficult to establish a senior civil service system. And then we will try to redefine and build some new function rather than overhaul. We don't have an overhaul of the original institution. We try to give a new layer or we define the function rather than substantially change, okay, the functions. Okay, the third point is many of our APA scholars, they were trained in United States or United Kingdom, okay, but our legal system is a continental law. So you'll find that we always, have Anglophone reform ideas, like a software, installed in the continental law hardware. What does it mean? Okay, we try to codify all the managerial flexibilization measures, okay, but that's not supposed to be codified in the Anglophone countries, okay? This would influence the feasibilities of those measures. Second, you will find that some policies, they will translate it into different methods. Tomorrow, we have a paper in our workshop. We have developed non-departmental public bodies. This is UK's practice. But you will find that you have nothing to do with the education reform. It look more like independent administration institutions in Japan. Okay, last 2 points. Okay, deep-seated traditional Chinese administrative practice and culture. The first point, you will find that even we now in Taiwan, okay, but regional governance remain prevalent. What does it mean? It's not trust-based governance in the Western literatures. It's talking about guanxi. Guanxi politics is still well working, especially in local and rural areas. And the second is malfunctioning of rule of law. Okay, we have many strict rule and regulation and added by the government, but I find that it's not really strictly enforced in our daily life. For example, even we will find that people is not very well respect the rule and regulation. Sometimes my own experience, somebody will tell you, teach you, even help you to bypass the rule and regulation, okay, in Taiwan. The third one may be about budget, okay. I find this weak economic rationality in policy planning. Actually, in our own class, we will talk about cost-benefit analysis, but it was not really realized in our government. We just have a textbook teaching, but not realized in our daily life. Okay, the last point is check and balance administration. Okay, we skip this point. It's about some duplicated agents problem. Okay, to the last point. Okay, state intervention rather than this about the developmental state. Maybe some of you should know that. Okay, because our success of economic take-off in 1970s and 1980s. Okay, we would call them is developmental state. In 1990s, it's fading out. Actually, we seldom talk about developmental state. But you will find that the people and the government here still, the mentality, okay, remain no change, okay? For example, the first point is people and the government prefer state intervention rather than marketization and market opening or deregulations. Okay, the second is people still prefer, okay, state-sponsored industrial development and protest home growth business. You will find that they offer not a really level playing field for all players in the markets. So at the end, we find results that we still remain a patriotism. What does it mean? This now is from just change from state of terrorism to a nanny state. And now we will sense that we are trying to develop a welfare state, but with no tax. Is this possible? I don't know. So anyway, now we are seeking for critical feedback and insight from our foreign guests. Okay, thank you very much. How to address this problem, I think is very important.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. It's the first time I'm in Taiwan, and I would like to congratulate really all those present, first of all. You look like backbenchers, but I think mentally you are on the front line here. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. I think I would like to congratulate TASPAA and the organization and the authorities to have organized this. This is a great event. I will be talking about the changing public sectors for changing societies. And I will focus on an OECD and European Union experience, and hopefully some elements will be relevant for Taiwan. First, a graph here. It's an exercise by the European Parliament on the impact of events that will happen and the probability. So you see the corner part of this slide. The European Parliament and the expert group expects a high probability and a high impact for issues around energy, extreme weather, social division in society. Russia is one on this scheme here too, migration. China, from a political point of view, which you see on the map here, the public debt, but also technical things like the semiconductors, algorithms, and democracy. That's the first, that's like a starting position to show. The second is, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I have chosen to present the Taiwan scores here, which looks actually quite good. I think there are two lower positions, SDG 13. I'm not sure if you know by heart what SDG 13 is. It's the unlucky number. It's climate. Climate has the unlucky number. So I think you will never forget SDG 13. It also, to my surprise, SDG 9. SDG 9 is on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. I must say, coming here for the first time, I have a very good impression of the infrastructure and part of the industry, and you are an innovative country from the ICT point of view here. But it's also something here where we should be aware, if we do not realize the SDGs, then the risk and the chances to have a major catastrophe are higher. And also, if we have this catastrophe, it will be much more difficult to solve it or to handle the crisis if the SDGs are not realized. A third issue of concern is trust. Trust in the civil service, in the parliament, in government. It also includes here police, because the trust in police is high. Here to show some contrasts. This is based on OECD numbers and surveys. I think it's an issue increasingly which becomes crucial. OECD reports used to put trust at the end of the pipeline of, investments and service delivery and delivering to citizens, and then ultimately trust. Actually, in the last reports, they have reversed this and said, if we want to keep trust and rebuild trust, what kind of outcomes and services should we deliver, and what does that mean for the public sector? A fourth issue of context here is about, and the pandemic was very clear about that, this is not just a VUCA context on crisis. You can have a major fire or a flooding or whatever, but the pandemic was systemic. It was a system quake. You're familiar with earthquakes, but this was a system quake. So it's not just volatile, but it's turbulent. It's not just uncertain, it's oscillating and unpredictable. It's not just complex, it's dominoes falling one after the other. It's not just ambiguous, it's with opposing evidence. And so the question then is, in Europe and within OECD countries, so how does the public sector respond to that? And how should we prepare it to anticipate this and to be ready and to be part of the solution? Because if we want to have a legitimate and trustworthy public sector and state, we have to be part of the solution. We have to be the solution and organize accordingly. And so that's, of course, in a democratic and effective governance point of view, because there are other models in the world. And so the first lesson to transform our public sectors is that we have to change a paradigm. We have to change from a kind of sequential thinking, which we used to have, normal standard operating procedures, then a crisis, then solving or handling the crisis, and then back to normal. And then the cycle starts again. This is past time. This is past time. From now on, we will have to think in a simultaneous way. So simultaneously having to ensure and guarantee service delivery to citizens in an inclusive way, and in parallel with that, trying to handle chronic crisis governance, crisis plural, because it will be a sequential thing. That's the challenge we will have to organize, and it has huge implications for the public sector. So we have to combine an inclusive and equitable service delivery, and the SDGs, one of the key elements of the SDGs is inclusion. It's remarkable in how many societies people, target groups based on different criteria feel excluded, and that becomes part of a huge problem. And we have to combine this with a resilient chronic crisis governance, which is at the level of the systems. And to do that, we will have to be innovative. We will have to organize effective innovation, not just within government, but also by government for society. And that includes digital and social innovation. And to do that, we will have to use what I call, and Professor Bennis already referred to it, we will have to use the entire governance space. And what is the governance space? The governance space consists of hierarchies, and of course, in our definition, this is rule-based, rule of law-based, the rule of law, not the rule by law. and in a democratic way shaped. And the second dimension of the governance space is markets, which need to be regulated. And the third dimension is networks, which also digital and some social networks perhaps also need to be regulated. We have seen, if you look at the history of public sector reforms, which of course I don't have the time to elaborate, but and one of the slides of Professor Bennis referred to this kind of quick crash course in the history of our systems. We started in many countries with Weberian systems, Weberian bureaucracies, which then were like put in a negative context because they were sclerosized, there was red tape, but also from an ideological point of view, it was questioned, and then became the markets. The new public management, which was also mentioned, new public management was supposed to save us. I beg to disagree with that, and I think the evidence is clearly showing that. And then the networks came to say we can accommodate a bit the markets, not to substitute the markets, but to complement the markets, including the response to the bureaucracy. But we have clearly seen with the pandemic that the state is back, and that strong bureaucracies, in the positive meaning of the word, are requested and required, and that hierarchies are a key element of the solution. It's very clear in many countries that NPM, New Public Management, as a neoliberal framework is not fit for purpose when you have to combine simultaneously ensured service delivery with chronic crisis governance and innovation. That is not good enough. This is some schemes to show you this governance space. And the first one is the new public management one with market type mechanisms, focus on performance and individual agencies, and with the supply and demand concept. And to the right is the modern new public governance, which is, we refer to digital governance, which is more the global system. We can have social networks, which is more local, because this theme of this workshop is glocalization. So the digital and the social combine actually these here. And of course, we refer to the neo-Weberian state, which I want to conclude, refer to. It is necessary to keep legitimacy, to keep trustworthiness in our systems, and to ensure collaborative governance, but in an organized way. And so if I just have to list, this is a bit of too much text on one slide, but the bold parts are the crucial words: democratic state with the rule of law. And then it's a huge list, but it's something we have to have as an ambition, to have service delivery which is open, accessible, participatory, affordable, transparent, sound and trustworthy, and the inclusion part comes next too. We want responsibility and accountability. We want results, but also appropriate behavior. Governments have to behave in an appropriate way, and that becomes a crucial element for trust. And finally, we have to involve all levels of government and all parts of society. Now, I also included culture, because, you know, Taiwan is looking at others. This is on globalization. That means we need comparative research. And if you have comparative research, the question is, where do you look? To whom do you look? And I've heard many countries here mentioned in one way or another. And I've just listed, you know, we heard Germany for the legal system. I've heard perhaps US and the UK and New Zealand too, which is the more the Anglo-Saxon part. Well, I think power distance is very different. You have the highest power distance, Taiwan, compared to the two others. And that has implications for decision. We have individualism. There, Taiwan is thinking in terms of teams. We have masculinity, which is a bit of an odd word, but it means actually that you allow participation more than others. Uncertainty avoidance has to do with the legal framing here. And you have the highest long-term orientation. So the previous slide actually the conclusion here is that you are closer to Germany, culturally based, than to the UK. And here, I dare to compare Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Let me just give the conclusion here. From a cultural point of view, Taiwan, and these are the figures by Hofstede, you are closer to South Korea than to Japan, which does not mean that you cannot learn things from Japan. So this is the final slide. Again, I think there is evidence to learn from one another, even if we are different, because we share problems. And I certainly want to congratulate all of you for this great event. Thank you.
Thank you. That's okay, thank you. Right, all right. In my very bad Taiwanese/Mandarin, ni hao. Thank you for joining me today. I'm so pleased to see so many people. And I also would like to congratulate TASPAA and congratulate our host university on their anniversary, and to thank them and all of the fabulous hosts that I've had at multiple universities. Their faculty members have been so generous, their university administration has been engaged, and their students have been delightful. We've shared so many experiences, and I'm sharing that with my students, and they're very excited to learn about the commonalities and the differences, which is what we're looking at today as we think about this phenomenon of glocalization and what that might mean for public governance. I want to thank the two speakers before me. You did a lot of the heavy lifting, and so I can kind of shortcut it a little bit and then talk about some questions that I think that we need to know more about. And that's why sharing our experiences in this type of forum is really critical, because it energizes me to think in different ways and inspires me to have more research into the big questions as well as the managerial questions. Oh, see, just like everybody. Okay. I'd like to first start off with this idea of governance as intergovernmental relationships. And then I'd like to scratch out governmental and put interorganizational, intersectoral, and interpersonal. And I would like to emphasize not relations, but relationships. When we think about governance, and especially shared governance, we need to think about how we come together and how we associate with the other to find the commonalities, and to be creative about how to form solutions that are beneficial to majorities, really thinking about society more than thinking about ourselves or about our associations or about our political parties or even our ideologies. And so when we do that, we're better positioned to solve or address, we can't really solve, but address these complex problems. We can coordinate, and we can think about not just horizontal relationships, the national level and the subnational level, and then down to the local level. But we can also be inclusive of the global level, as well as the horizontal intersectoral levels that we have across policy domains. Because it's not just about government, it needs to be about other organizations and groups and individuals. And so I think that there's this tendency that we compound it. We think about it as being very messy because there's so many actors. And perhaps that does make it complicated, but do we know the ways in which it will make it more effective? We don't necessarily need to be efficient when it comes to this idea of governance. We need to be efficient when we think about management and administration. Civil servants, we would like them to be efficient, But we also would like them to be concerned about the broader social impact that we expect not only from government, but that we expect from ourselves as a member of society. So that would be the first question that I've been scratching my head about for some time now and thinking about it even more in this context. I think about this because I think there's an evolution in the practices in addition to those actors that I just was talking about. When we look at those practices, we often talk about metaphors of federalism. Our friend Ed Benton, he just came up with this idea of a kaleidoscope, which is like a little telescope, but when you look inside it, there's all sorts of pieces that are constantly shifting and creating new and often beautiful patterns. I think that that's the way our relationships should be, so that we can have experiences that trigger our imagination and encourage us to be innovative. Being innovative, I think, is this a necessity because of fiscal interdependence, is that we don't like paying much for government. I will say, because I'm a state employee, that we don't get enough money from the state, we don't get enough money from the federal government. You know, we're all looking with our hands out, which is important, right? Because we have certain needs that aren't being met in society. But I think we have to think more about the interdependence, is that there's a certain amount of money that's available, or that willingness to pay. But have we tapped this idea of willingness to share? Is that each of us, even as individuals, we have resources that can help government. We can have resources that can help ourselves so that we don't have to rely on government. And we have resources that can help society. So how do we use that? That's my question, is how do we benefit from more actors and more relationships? There are a lot of applied policy lessons. Thank you very much. I'll just drop to the bottom of my slide, is to what extent is glocalization, this dual phenomenon of global responses and global actions having ripple effects, combined with this local or urbanization tendency where we're really thinking about our immediate needs every day versus the long-term global future, as Professor Bouckaert has pointed out. And is this chicken or is this egg? It's both. We can never answer that question, but we know that both need to be attended to, the short term as well as the long term. And so here's a policy example from, you can see the source on the bottom. Thinking about engineering, thinking about energy, and then also thinking about the impact of energy on the economy. So when we think about glocalization, we see innovation. It happens every day. It's small, admittedly, but we know from best practices that we need to think about what other people do. We need to adapt it, not adopt it. We need to contextualize it to our situation. And then we need to leapfrog ahead, because what we're doing now will not be sufficient for what we need to do in the future. So we need to strive, and we need to be inspired by how much we've accomplished and where we can go. I think that the different disciplines are coming together on that, is that we're becoming much more collaborative, and we understand that the relationships are necessary for complex social phenomenon, like the things that both of the speakers before have been describing, and you've heard in other panels. So these are the questions. They don't keep me up at night, but I do think about them a lot. And I try to understand from the practitioner's perspective, because I've also had a lot of background in private sector, in public sector, as well as in the nonprofit sector. And so I try to think in the kaleidoscope form. How does this look for government? How does it look for the private sector? What about us as volunteers or members of non-governmental organizations? And even what about me as an individual? Is there anything that we can accomplish together, separately and together, to make this a little bit less difficult time, or a little bit less difficult place to live in? Or even imagine this, a better place to live in and a better place for future generations, because that's really the idea about sustainability. We have to understand the futurity of not just our decisions, especially decisions about money. We have to understand the futurity of our decisions for future generations, for plants and animals that we'd like others to see, that we were good caretakers of the earth and the responsibilities that we were given. So I have just a couple thoughts. You know, I think about this a lot, and I'm a university employee, so I have to come up with some conclusions to show all my wisdom. But I do think that climate adaptation, which is an area I'm studying in the context of severe weather events, I do think that I'm engaged in a multidisciplinary team, and it's very informative for us. I keep turning that kaleidoscope, turning it, interacting with my colleagues, and I have good ideas. I have more good ideas than I could have by myself. I think also, as I mentioned, willingness to pay means we will give government authority to take our money. Willingness to share means we will give resources for the good of the whole. We don't have to go through government necessarily. And so this becomes co-production, is that I'm producing society and I'm working with the relationships that I have, like all of you, and now my new friends that I've met on this lovely visit, to have this community co-production, that we're acting together because we have a shared common concern, and we will work, or we're committed to work, to find mutual solutions that make us better. We maybe can't solve it, but we can become better. And so I would encourage my university colleagues, university students, and even practitioners to join us in answering these questions, because we need that practical perspective. Dwight Waldo was correct, is that public administration benefits from having academics, so academics that try to understand practice, as well as pracademics, practitioners that are willing to become engaged in this idea of the normative questions. What do we think society should do? How can we improve our government programs? We need to build a bridge between the pracademics and the acapractics. And if we do that, I think our solutions will be much more inspiring, and it will be easier for us to engage, and sustainability becomes more of a reality than perhaps we feel it is today. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good. Yeah, no, this has been a very somber afternoon. We have been told about a lot of challenges, from the challenge of posed by democratization, politicization of public policy, public administration in the context of an authoritarian bureaucracies. We have been told about the problems of that hierarchy faces in a democratized environment with societies having changed. The challenges of governmental direction when co-production is needed. These are really big problems. But in some ways, we have to keep it in perspective. Societies have always had challenges. You know, these challenges look rather small when we think of what societies faced during, or communities faced during Ice Age. You know, and there some lessons there that the problems may be global, may have global origins, but the solutions are local, and some mixture of it. Each society will have its own specific problems to which it will have to find specific solutions. The inspirations may be global, we can learn from all, as we are doing today. And Taiwan truly has an excellent record of facing challenges before. I can't think of too many societies in the world which have as many challenges as Taiwan does. Of course, any society could do better, but really, you know, we should give our Taiwanese society a lot of credit for having not only survived, but prospered. And there is no particular reason to think that it will stop. prospering as it has in the past. The nature of its response will have to be different. We all have suggestions and ideas, and we heard many of them today, and there are a lot more out there, which the Taiwanese society and the government will have to process and deal with, and see which ones are appropriate. But one question that has bothered me over the last several years, my background is public policy. We're constantly telling governments and policymakers what to do, and get very frustrated when that is not done. It's only about 10 years ago, so I started to query, maybe that's a wrong question to ask, what should governments do? And the question should be, what are governments capable of doing? So the capacity issue has to be always there when asking questions about what they should do. And so this is when my co-authors and I started working on the concept of policy capacity. And I thought we were some outliers in this field. But looking at the citation numbers, it seems that there was a latent demand out there. So what I want to do is basically lay it out to you as to how, what is the things that Taiwan could do to face the challenges that are emerging. And I would say, so instead of telling Taiwanese government, Taiwanese society what to do, it should reflect hard on what are its strengths, what are its shortcomings. And the question shouldn't be answered at a global level in the sense of Taiwan-wide. If there is no society or government that is universally bad or good. It's a sectoral issue. They are good at some things, they're not so good at some other things. We should learn more from what they are good at doing and transfer to some of the other. But also equally accept that some weaknesses are probably hard to avoid and overcome. And with that knowledge, deal with the problems appropriately. I will not go through this. This is a very long presentation. And one thing that we learned as we went along with thinking about this project and empirically, I haven't done much empirical work, but many other people have done it, is to look at the sectoral, the policy capacity should be assessed at the sector level. Each sector has its own issues and problems, and we should be assessing capacities at that level. Anyway, so what we do is we classify capacities into three categories, just to get a handle on the subject. Political capacity, to navigate the political landscape. Public policy challenges exist in a political context. Responses to them must be undertaken within a political context. That Weberian bureaucracy that was mentioned earlier was designed to stay away from, to rise above politics. And I will have to and come back to Professor Bennis's point about that this is a dysfunction. Actually, the politicization of a bureaucracy is an absolute necessity. Because after all, these are the key players in solving society's problems. They must be politically sensitive. They must be politically accountable. Not in the way politicians are. The specific ways in which a bureaucracy will be held accountable will depend on the societal norms, cultures, institutions, history, but they must be. Another one is organizational. This is at the sectoral level. Does the agency have the capacity to understand problems, to foresee a solution, to make arrangements for implementing, especially? And then, of course, analytical policy capacity. It's not 19th century or even 20th century when you can just figure it out on your own. Many of the problems are so technical that you really have to be have substantial knowledge of the domain. Most bureaucracies in the world are still generalist. They think that the job is just managerial. You just, some clever people have designed the policy. You just, no, there's a significant analytical work and expertise required, and we have to think about how to meet that. So we have this matrix, 3x3 matrix. I won't go there. I think it will take. Anyway, you can figure it out that you line them up, the capacities, and at the levels in which. A simpler will be for policy capacity will look something like this. When societies or governments are figuring out at the sectoral level, are they capable of addressing the more emerging challenges? The political astuteness of the bureaucracy. What is not acceptable to the society? What is acceptable to the society? Public servants have to know about this. To say that this is a politician's job is not. It's contributing to the problem. Political support for public agencies. Politicians and the political masters really do have to express their support for the. This has, in Anglo-Saxon countries, perhaps more than others, to disparage your own civil service to score some points. It doesn't help anybody because as it is, they have a very difficult job. The least they expect is that, but does it exist? And this is a part of the robust political engagement point that Amy pointed out about coalition building. You need a willing coalition for policy solutions to work. And civil service, as well as the politicians, of course, it's the primary job of the politician, but the civil service have to do their part. The operational level or managerial level, agency leadership. Most bureaucracies still are promoting people based on seniority alone rather than on their ability to lead the organization, to set visions, take the agency along with them. Is there a financial personnel system in place that rewards merits, recognizes merits, and then rewards them? Coordination of various kinds. This problem information technology was supposed to solve. Actually, it has aggravated it. There's too much information available pointing in different directions. Is there a system in place? A system for monitoring agency performance, and of course the rule of law and so on. Analytical domain expertise. How is each agency get to, or individuals within the government are equipped to deal with the problems? Analytical skills. Processes for collecting and disseminating information. The technology for collecting information has far exceeded our ability to analyze them and understand, especially understand them. But in this part of the world, there's also a problem. Governments don't share data or don't share it in a usable form. And really, they are disadvantaging themselves in the process and undermining their own capacity. And also political support for policy analysts. I still hear politicians in the region, and I'm sure other parts of the world, where, these are ivory tower professors. These are not really our practical concern. Well, maybe, but maybe there is a need for rigorous policy analysis, and the politicians need to, so does the system exist? And so we can have a somewhat approximate idea. This will never be there is no hypothesis here as such. So if those are interested in empirical work on the topic, it's very hard. It's more like it's a practical tool for estimating one's own capacity to perform a job and to see whether they have the wherewithals for going forward and facing the challenges that are upon us. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks.
OK， 好，Okay, thank you so much. Now we are going to have the Q&A session using Slido system, okay? And we are very happy that Professor Wang Huimi is going to assist with translation. So, I'm going to ask Professor Wang, what's our first question now?
We have two questions so far, and also you can see on the screen. The first one, do European countries have any specific and feasible measures for SDG 13? Okay, so I think it's all about climate change actions. So I think this question can be for Professor Bouckaert to answer it.
Please.
Thank you.
Yes. Hello? Yes, thank you for this question. I think obviously the European Commission has a very clear strategic plan to work on a green economy and to convert the economy to as green as possible, and uses different instruments for that. And that becomes a framework because that money goes to the national countries. And the national countries, the members of the European Union, also have their strategic plans. That differs from country to country. One of the challenges is the legal frames which we have, and the tension between economy and climate, including certain target groups like the farmers. So we have some tensions within the countries. But in general, yes, and most of these texts are available on internet. So if you would go Google and go to the European Union and the Commission's documents, you will find oversights of these measures.
Okay, second question, please.
Okay, the second one is, what are the key factors to make co-production successful? So I think this question, perhaps Professor Franklin and also Professor Bouckaert can answer this question. Thank you.
I think that's a fabulous question. It's partially answered. I don't think it's fully answered. Some of the things that we know about co-production is that it's very good when people have policy efficacy. So policy efficacy is generally described as you have some knowledge of government processes. More importantly, you know how to access government processes. And one thing that's a big barrier to access is the language. I often say, because I've worked in government as well as the private sector, and now I'm teaching all of these words because we talk about money, which is very private sector oriented, in addition to the big zeros of government. I often say, I speak government, so I can help. Right? We sometimes say, I'm from government, I'm here to help, but I say, I speak government, because most people don't understand government. It's a complex and foreign language to them, and it's intimidating because government is the authority. And so we automatically assume that they're the experts who are not interested in what we have to say. I think that that's not true. I've talked to a lot of civil servants in my research. I've been a civil servant. I know civil servants from my classroom, and they share their experiences. And so I don't think that that is true. I think co-production is possible, but we need to have better pathways. And so we need civil society organizations, or the so-called third-party intermediaries, because they're usually non-governmental, to reach out to people that have an interest in what happens and to help them to understand how the processes work and the language that might be successful. I think we also need this pathway where you first are talking to government administrators, because in our communities, they might be our friends. They look like us. They might not be so intimidating. Once we work with the public administrators, or the civil servants, if you will, those people work with the elected officials, as do the civil society organization, or these third-party intermediaries. And so they can help us. They can have this like introduction, and we can learn how to be an effective participant. Not only will it help with co-production, is you'll find out more about what government does and how you can assist, but it will be a pathway to political participation too. You will start to engage in co-productive activities that build our society, like voting, or like attending political meetings and having policy forum discussions, or perhaps even running for office, because you represent a really critical view. And so I think it's a baby steps situation. Co-production, I firmly believe, is possible, but there are a few barriers, and we know some ways to overcome it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So you want to add, Professor Bouckaert, you want to add something to the question? Co-production? No? Okay. Then we'll proceed to the third question, please.
Okay, so I think here there are 3 questions for Professor Ramesh. Okay, the first one, in terms of policy capacity, could you please give an example in Singapore regarding how you measure? And other one, how do we enhance our public servants' policy capacity? And last one, can you take Singapore's public servant system as an example to address the policy capacity measurements? Professor Ramesh, please.
No, but looking at
There are 3 questions.
Yeah, 3 questions.
Yeah. But
I should start with a disclaimer. I work at the university there, and I don't have any access to government information on what they do within the government. I read the newspaper that you probably do. Yeah, so I really have no... I really don't have specific knowledge on what is done about policy capacity, so I will comment as an outsider who happens to live in Singapore and meet. We do know that things get done in Singapore. When a government sets a goal, it's usually, at least from outside, what we have seen, it works. And one reason we hypothesize is that it's very clear about its goal and holds individuals or small groups of leaders accountable for them. So that may well account for a lot of fairly high capacity, in the sense that an individual or a small group of individuals are given a responsibility and they must deliver on those accountability. The personnel system is designed to reward for individual achievements. One's annual bonus can be as high as 50% of your annual salary, which is already the highest in the world. I'm not recommending that there is a relationship between capacity and high salary, but it tells you but the converse is true, that you do have to, there's always a chance that you may miss that 50% bonus or something like that. So there is will this system work anywhere else? Probably not. Because going back to my point, problems are very context dependent. The institutions have to be equally context dependent. Singapore is a small country with a very tightly organized British type bureaucracy, but has introduced the private sector management practices quite thoughtfully, in the sense that what are the kinks have been worked out. And in a way, it's a small government, fairly small government in a small country. It's possible. So what are the examples? I don't know what are the examples of how they build their capacity. But for any society, including Singapore, they must assess their own capacity at the individual level, at the agency level. What makes them able to do things? And there are things that, and in Singapore too, a lot of things that haven't worked. The society and the government should make an assessment. What capacities were lacking that prevented the achievement of those goals? I'm not entirely following all the questions.
Oh, because it's jumping. The question is jumping, I think, right?
So citizen participatory is obviously not mine.
Let's see.
Or two.
There's one question. Can you take
How do you
Singapore's
organize-
public servant system as an example to address
So this
the
one, how do we
political-
enhance? This one here. Okay, how do we enhance public servants' policy? It will depend, right? It depends on the agency that we are assessing and on the particular task for which we are making an assessment. Do we have the capacity to formulate, say, regulations for generative AI? What skills would be needed to write the rules? What kind of analytical skills, what kind of political skills would be needed to negotiate with the industry? And the industry itself has many conflicting voices on this issue. What will it take to resolve those issues politically, in addition to technically? What kind of monitoring systems will they need to put in place? It may be one thing to pass the rules, but to enforce them, when the industry itself knows a lot more about the problem. So the government's own analytical capacities have to be so high, and that's part of the problem that we have known for almost 100 years. The regulated industries know more about the problem than the regulators. So it will be absolutely essential for the governments to build their own analytical capacity to deal with these emerging technical issues. So it really would depend on the sector and the specific issue being dealt with.
Okay, we'll give Professor Ramesh a break now. Okay, Professor Bouckaert would like to add something to this question, please.
Yeah, one of the things to keep and build capacity at the individual and organizational level is that governments should contract out less their brains. I think it's a crucial element. We've seen it in many countries, and it has resulted in some disasters in some countries. To contract out your brains is never a good idea. So you have to have critical capacity within the government. And then if you combine it with public service motivation in hiring people, you can trust your civil servants and they will do the job. And of course, we need new types of capabilities, but I think it's crucial to say. So I'm actually now also pleading to have solid internal consultancy firm in the public sector, not to have to contract it out to the private big four or whatever big and whatever four they are.
Yeah, I'm totally agree with you. Okay, good point. Okay, so we want to switch to a new question.
Okay, citizen participatory project is effective for including local ideas. Any recently successful example on climate change and decarbonization in your country? This question for Professor Franklin, please.
Thank you. I like that question. It's a very nice question for thinking about glocalization, because when we look at decarbonization, it's a global phenomenon. In Oklahoma, it's a phenomenon that some of us, especially some of our political leaders, would like to ignore. And so we've seen that we have not just a societal problem in terms of sustainability, but we've also converted this so that we think about it as a political issue as well as an economic issue. And so one phenomenon that we have is that we've got regulation and laws that have been passed that encourage a 3-tier production system. So imagine, if you will, Oklahoma is the land of the dinosaurs. And because we're the land of the dinosaurs, we have very, very high oil and gas production, a non-renewable resource. In fact, we have a whole school devoted to petroleum engineer because there are so many companies that are headquartered in Oklahoma because we're a nice tax haven for them. And so we've taken that and we've used fracking or injection wells, and we have very high production. They contribute to the economy through extraction taxes. But then we finally got smart, and we said, wait a minute, we still have air. What can we do with air to make money? And so now, in just a short period, maybe 20 years, you see so many wind farms. If you've watched the movie Oklahoma, you know that the wind comes whistling down the plain. It's very true. We're a very windy state. And so we contribute to the national energy grid. We produce more than we can use. So that's income number 2. Income number 3 is the old-fashioned income, is that we have livestock. We raise a lot of cattle, and we raise racing horses. And so they're a very good income source too. Imagine you have a couple acres, let's say 10 acres of land in Oklahoma. You sell the wind, you sell the grass, and you sell what's below the earth. So it's politically and economically a nice solution. Does it help with decarbonization? The wind probably does, but the other one's not so much. And kind of a complicated, unintended consequence of this is fracking has led to a lot of earthquakes. But the good part about it is government has intervened, and it now tells the oil and gas producers how much water they can inject, how often, at what pressure. And so that was really forced on them by the insurance industry because they were tired of paying for earthquake damage to the structures in Oklahoma. So there's co-production possibilities. It doesn't necessarily translate instantly to decarbonization, but it certainly is helping more than just fracking would do if we only had the one income system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And there's one question with regard to citizens' trust in the government. I would like to direct this question to Bennis first, please. Okay. Well, maybe Professor Wang wants to read the question first. Okay. Can you read it? Can you see it? Okay.
To Professor Bouckaert, okay, this question.
Sorry, to Bennis.
Oh, to Bennis, sorry.
Yeah. Maybe
there are two questions for Bennis.
I think Professor Bouckaert can, because they do research on the trust, but I can give some feedback on these questions. Yeah, because this very good question is the government is hard to build, okay, but easy to destroy the trust, okay, the trust problem. In our class, actually, I have over some training course for civil service, talking about the policy communication. We always talk about a story. Maybe all of you should know that in Qing Dynasty, okay, there's a Shangyang, okay, there's a story about trust building. Move the wood from South Gate or North Gate, I forget it, okay, to the North Gate or South Gate, and then somebody would finish this job, okay, I give you go. What's the implication for this story? Is about, you may say it's a public relations, you may say it's a propaganda, but it's a track record. Because after you finish this job, I will give you go. Okay? But our government, you think there's a trust problem. That's the problem is that I promise something, but you not really realize what you promise. It's your track record. If you have a good track record, I trust you. You always break your promise. I cannot trust you. I think it's a very simple question. Very simple question for you. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, Professor Hui Min, next question, please.
All right, so this question for Professor Bouckaert. You indicate the energy price is a high-risk issue in the future. What's your comment to Taiwan energy policy?
Thank you. I first want to say something on trust, too. Actually, scientifically, there are 4 reasons why people trust government. First of all, the government is delivering services in an inclusive way and in an effective way. Effectiveness was mentioned there. The second thing is integrity. So governments have to be appropriate and behave in an appropriate way, and it has to be perceived like that. The third issue is participation, not necessarily in the sense of co-production, but the feeling that people are included, that they are taken into account. That's a very important element. OECD adjusted its survey to include that element of inclusion. And the fourth element is really that government is perceived as being part of a solution of a problem. So when there is a crisis, that it is the government that is able to solve it and perceived as such. And these are the four elements on trust. Okay, now to the energy price. It's supply and demand. What Europe has done is, first of all, trying to reduce the demand. That's the first thing. And by mobilizing industry and households to consume less. And that has been happening through more insulation, but also change of behavior. And the reduction of gas consumption has decreased significantly. And that's the first element here. The second thing is to change the pricing models, because a lot of the pricing is taxes too. And so to make sure there's a kind of the price elasticity to work on that and to work on the price setting here and to change the price models there. A third thing is to change the mix of energy here. And of course, here we see a huge increase in solar energy and wind energy in Europe. And these are three major things which require still a conversion of our economy and energy production. But that's, in general, in shorthand, what Europe has been doing.
Okay, thank you. Professor Bennis So, because I think people here are so interested in your perspective of insiders and outsiders at the same time. We have so many questions directed to you.
Suddenly, so many questions for me.
So I'm going to give you 3 minutes, okay, to answer all those questions. You are going to be the last person answering the questions. You just pick whatever you want to say. Okay, please.
I try to answer these questions. Okay, the first question about capacity building. Okay, because my research interest is in civil service system. What I'm observed the problems in the civil service system here is what's the positioning of especially for the newly recruited civil service? Okay, is this a generalist or specialist? Okay, I think it's not very clear because even though we still have some so-called specialization in the recruitment, divided into different so-called examination category, okay, and then get into the government. After that, you will find that the civil service can easily, move to different profession. If you talk about capacity building, of course, I don't mean that they cannot move to other profession. We should have some strategies or top-down so-called HRM, human resource management. But now, even though we talk about public status human resource management, but how can you enforce this strategy if the manager cannot really manage the civil service transfer? It's ridiculous. Civil service can easily apply to transfer to any agents and did not tell you beforehand. How can you build capacity? Because there's no consistent strategy you can enforce for the manager. Even the manager, they can move out. You find these agents very poor. Okay, I don't want to stay here. I leave tomorrow. Who do the capacity building? No. Okay. So I think there's an infrastructure problem. I mean the institutional problem. You have to solve the institutional problem. Then you can talk about capacity building. This is the first answer to these questions.
You don't have to answer all of them. You only have 2 minutes left.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
They still have other questions about what? Or populism and professionalism. Okay, it's somewhat I give the response to Professor Bennis about the politicization problem in Taiwan. I know that I agree with Professor Remes that, okay, it is impossible to talk, okay, the civil service is purely politically neutral. It's impossible, right? I agree with you. And I also, you will read a book edited by the Guy Peters talking about politicizations of civil service in Western countries. Okay, but the case in Taiwan is somewhat different. Just what I said, the development path of the civil service or bureaucracy here, in the European country or Western country, they pass through the stage of rebellion bureaucracy stage. But for mainland China and Taiwan, they didn't really pass through the rebellion stage, but direct pass through the NPM. Okay, we didn't build up an independent and professional, okay, capacity before we talk about NPM. This is a problem. That's why I would call it to become populism. Okay, so this is a conflict because we didn't really pass through the, the build-up stage of the professionalization of civil service. So you'll find that during the democratization, especially after year 2000, the civil service become really servants, okay? Not state, but servant, but they just observe any order from the politician. They will not, increasingly, okay, they don't want to make their own judgment or make judgment according to professional standards. Okay, that's what I mean. Okay, and no problem?
Well, I guess you have used up all the time. Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you so much. Because other groups will be using this room, this venue, pretty soon. So I will briefly summarize the conclusion. Okay, first, based on the experiences of EU and OECD, Professor Bouckaert believes that the new public governance regime in the future should be the new NWS model, the so-called new neo-Weberian state model. So it uses hierarchy to guide the entire governance space, including hierarchies, markets, and networks. And second, Professor Amy Franklin provided 3 critical takeaways, including the necessity of a multidisciplinary approach to handling wicked problems, better awareness of willingness to pay to share, or to share, and the value of a commitment to community co-production. And third, Professor Ramesh pointed out that governments need to assess and build their policy capacity. And he also told us that measuring and operationalizing policy capacity is quite challenging. So combined all together, I believe whether to apply the NWS model, implement 3 takeaways, or properly measure and operationalize policy capacity, all require attention to Taiwan's unique context. And just like Bennis mentioned earlier, that Taiwan's public governance has its unique context, such as deep-seated traditional Chinese administrative practice and culture, or legacies of developmental state. So I think as a result, we must adjust global public governance practices or ideas to make them suitable and practical for Taiwanese society. I would say this is the essence of public governance on glocalization. So I think my summary probably does not reflect the insights of all 4 brilliant scholars, but the audience and I have all learned a lot today. Okay. So thank you so much to all the speakers and all of you for your enthusiastic participation. So now let's give a really big hand to all the speakers and yourself. Then I must conclude the session. The session is closed. Thank you. Photo session.
本场圆桌论坛到此结束，谢谢各位学术及实务界先进带来精彩的研究成果与知识分享，也谢谢苏教授的主持。
The roundtable forum is now concluded. Thank you to all participants for your wonderful research and knowledge exchange. A special thanks to Professor Su for moderating the session.